This is episode 31 of Auch Interessant, or as I should say, also interesting, because this episode will be in English. Joining me today is John Roderick. He's famously known for his part in The Long Winters, his podcasts, the Omnibus podcast, which he's doing with Ken Jennings, and Roderick on the Line, which he's doing with Marilyn Mann. And I'm so happy to have you here. Hello, John.
Hello, it's my pleasure. I'm happy to be here. You know, it's midnight here where I am, or 12:30 at night, and it's in the morning there for you.
Yeah, it is. It's 9:30 a.m. So
yeah,
starting up early. So maybe people who don't know you yet, the first time I saw The Long Winters was in a cover made by Adam Savage, Woodstock San Francisco Festival in 2012, and as somebody who follows tech in the internet regularly, I saw his cover, didn't know your band, didn't know The Long Winters back then, but Adam Savage was a remarkable fellow, so I was intrigued what was interesting him, and so I stumbled upon your music career, and I have to say it's quite moving, very interesting, and you're still doing it, which is impressive, looking on the long history of The Long Winters. Did you ever met Adam Savage? Do you know him, or is the cover new to you?
No, I do. In fact, so wait, just to clarify, you already knew me as a podcaster, and this was your introduction to me as a musician? Or is this the first you ever heard of me?
That's the first time I ever saw The Long Winters. Had no connection to that at all. And later on, when I know your podcasts, it made click, and
you made the connection.
I knew that I knew something from you early on.
Well, Adam Savage actually reached out to me and said, I really love your song, The Commander Thinks Aloud. I'd like to learn how to play it, but I don't play the piano at all. I don't play any musical instrument, but I really want to play your song. And so I said, well, you're in luck. It's a very simple song. And I took my phone and I put it on my own piano with the video facing down at the keys. So I put the camera down at the piano and I said, here's the simplest chords, and I played it. And then I said, once you've learned it this way, if you want to add a little bit of, an additional complication to the chords, here's how you would do that. And I played it for him in a short, 1 or 2 minute phone video and sent it off. And apparently he, based on that, taught himself how to play the piano just in order to play this version of a song that he then debuted at the show that you saw. And he continued to play that show, and then he and I became very good friends. He would visit me here. I would go visit him there. I once drove him from Seattle to Canada. We had a long friendship, and then, of course, I got canceled a couple of years ago.
Oh, the Bean Dad thing?
The Bean Dad thing, and as a result of that, several sort of people that I knew that really made their career on the internet, they felt that I had become a social liability. And so Adam, although we talked all the time, and in fact during Bean Dad, he was one of my advisors and helping me deal with the fallout. But after that, he has stopped communicating with me. So it's quite a tragedy, actually.
It sounds like one, because first of all, it's really a big act of appreciation going to someone saying, I like your song, I want to learn an instrument just to perform it. But
it is.
And looking back, the Bean Dad thing, I remember briefly reading it on Twitter, but it was for me just a bad going joke and nothing serious. If you don't mind, we could wrap it up for the audience, what Bean Dad actually was.
Yeah. Do you want to do it, or do you want me?
I can go first and you can add in. So,
okay.
As far as I remember, you tweeted something along the lines of, when my daughter isn't able to use a can opener to have her baked beans, she shouldn't have them and she should figure out herself how to open it, or something like that. I was amused, especially in the era of safety can openers. It was nothing crazy. You didn't say it, so I gave her a nail and a hammer and said, go figure. But so for me, it was quite obviously a joke, but I already knew some of your work, so I knew that you wouldn't let your kids starve. But people got very angry about you, and I think in the Wikipedia they summed it up with child service was child security, however it's called over there in the States, was looking for the state of well-being of your kid just from that stupid joke.
Well, in fact, it's not that they noticed it, but 12 different people from around the world contacted them and said, this man is torturing his daughter and forcing her to, what it was it's during the pandemic. We're sitting around bored all day, every day for 2 years. And she came to me with a manual can opener, a hand crank, not electric. Mm. And it was obvious that she said, how does this work? She knew it was a tool to open a can, but she had no conception of how it operated. And as I looked at the can opener, I said, oh, actually, that's a ridiculous instrument. It's a strange tool. When you look at a can opener relative to a can, it isn't obvious how it works. And people my age, of course, we always used can openers. It was the only way to get a can open. But she grew up in an era with the cans with the pull top. She'd never used one. And I said, won't it be funny today to just sit and work on figuring out how this tool works? And we did. Well, on Twitter, I told that story, and my tweets maybe weren't clever enough to communicate that this was just a average father-daughter day. It made it sound like I was torturing her. And for 3 days, 3 whole days, I was the number one trending topic on Twitter around the world. Hundreds of thousands of people were very, very upset that I was forcing my daughter to do all kinds of terrible, they invented in their heads all these terrible things I was doing, torturing her. And the only thing that knocked me off of the top trend on Twitter was that Donald Trump's fans stormed the United States Capitol. And on January 6th, they, in their multitudes, crashed through the door of the U.S. Congress building. And then all of a sudden, finally, John Roderick and Bean Dad were no longer the most important topic on the internet.
Which is...
Maybe some of your listeners will remember this moment. But
yeah, I think the Bean Dad actually produced some memes people might have seen, referring to it, like trying to remember. Somebody was like, why should you teach your kid anything? Let them figure it out how Bean Dad does it. And so that kicked off some hilarious memes with, hey Dad, how do I buy groceries? Yeah, here are the car keys, go figure. And I remember that. But from my point of view, it was all fun and games, and I'm still surprised how serious all of that got.
Yeah, it was too bad only because, now it's irrelevant, except that I had a lot of friends who, like I did, spent a lot of time online and had many fun years on Twitter, and we had many, many fans and shared many fans online. And this was an event that happened specifically online. When I go around the town, nobody had any contact with it because they weren't living on Twitter. And so a lot of those friends and relationships I had on Twitter were very damaged by this, where none of my in-person relationships were. It's just that social media universe. And eventually, not for being dead, but for another reason entirely, I got banned from Twitter, permanently banned, after Elon Musk took over. And so I didn't have to make the decision, do I stay on Twitter? Is it a healthy play? I didn't have to make it because they permanently kicked me off. So I was finally free of it, after 15 years of really enjoying it there. Then I had one really bad year, and then I got banned.
Probably for the better, because nowadays Twitter is a burning pile of trash. I can't really say it anyway else. I mean, it always was an acquired taste, so explaining to people why Twitter, especially in the old days, was fun was hard to convince them. But when they once got hooked, they most of the time stayed. Yeah.
Was there always a German language Twitter that was also vibrant and fun?
So Twitter in Germany was especially a place for online journalists in the early days. So starting of 2007 to, I would say, 2010, 2011, everybody on Twitter was there because they had a blog or were some kind of journalist who's reporting about digital things. And only in the last 5 or 6 years, it became a mandatory place for politicians to be. And so it was a very tech-centric space. Those fellows are now on the Mastodons doing their Mastodonian things. Yeah, it was one of our ministers, our Minister for Digital Transformation and whatsoever, Dorothee Bär. She said once on Twitter that it's a place purely for politicians, journalists, and psychopaths. And I think that sums it up quite well.
Yes. Well, for listeners who weren't aware, from 2007 to 2013 or 14 here in the United States, Twitter was a very creative place. There weren't any politicians or actors or celebrities. It was a very fertile, imaginative, fun place. And as more and more people joined, of course, it became worse and worse because people are awful. And the more people you have, the more awful a thing is.
Especially early Twitter felt like an image board without all the snorks.
Yes. Yes, exactly. And, I remember the first time, you may remember this too, but it was, what was it? It was something like Keanu Reeves. No, it wasn't him. It was some actor and Bank of America. And the actor had 900,000 followers and Bank of America had 900,000 followers. And the two were in a race to see who got to 1 million followers first. Oh, it was Ashton Kutcher and Bank of America were in a race. And eventually Ashton Kutcher got 1 million followers first. And I feel like, and they were the first person to ever have 1 million followers. And I feel like that day was the death of all that was good on social media. Like nothing could illustrate it more profoundly than a bank and a movie star in a race to see who could make Twitter terrible first,
Quite sadly, nowadays, Ashton Kutcher is putting a lot of time and power into ruining the internet for everybody. So,
no.
There is an initiative in the European Union, and they say it's for child safety and child protection, and they want to ban end-to-end encryption in messengers in the EU. And somehow they paid Mr. Kutcher some money and convinced him that it's a cause worth fighting for. And now he is lobbying at the European Union so that we should ban end-to-end encryption in messaging. The potential harm that could go hand in hand with not being able to read every message. And I'm up for transparency, but I still think that privacy is a human right. And if I want to send you some ridiculous things, I should be liable, but not by all my messages being transparent by default. So he is actually ruining his reputation among the internet folks at the moment.
Wow, who knew that I would reference Ashton Kutcher and he would end up being a contemporary and relevant reference? Oh well. Okay, so moving right along, now that everybody knows all of our internet history, I'm assuming I was just in Germany, and I have a great affection for Germany and for the Germans. I walked across Germany once.
Yeah, you walked across Europe, and
yeah,
that's a recurring story.
It is. I visited East Berlin when it was still behind the wall, and yes. I was in Berlin at the time that the wall was opened.
Yes. I listened to these stories, and especially your being trapped in East Berlin episode is one of the craziest German stories I ever listened to. So
really,
for those who don't know, so as far as I can remember, you told at Roderick on the Line, you were traveling through Europe with not quite legal Interrail passes you got from some shady guys, and right. You've ended up in not sure, Munich, Switzerland, somewhere where you can board a train going to Warsaw. And so going to the back then Soviet Union, and you just hopped on and played sleeping or whatever, and woke up at Alexanderplatz in Berlin, back then East Berlin, the German Democratic Republic. And from there on, you had the day in East Germany, had a ridiculous amount of East German Deutsche Mark. And you had dinner at the Fernsehturm at the Alexanderplatz, which is in itself such a crazy story. It would make a perfect movie. And so you told us the story looking back on you not being sure what part of that memory you made up. So there was a very interesting story of you ringing up old friends, old contacts, and old fellows back from the trip, telling them the story, some of them remembering, some not, some remembering some puzzle pieces. And it was interesting listening to you, how you try to remember and recreate the story while questioning your sanity. I will link the episode. It was quite an interesting story. I told many of my German friends, and they were interested, but they lost it when I told them it's an English-speaking podcast. But it's a great story that should be one day a book or even a movie.
It was very difficult to put all the pieces together because, of course, we were so drunk all the time that and I have a pretty good memory when I was drinking, but it's been a long time. And some of that stuff, in your youth, certain things you've told the story enough times that you don't remember whether you're remembering the event or remembering having told it. And my stories are always 110% true.
Yes.
At least, maybe 120% true. But this was, as you say, like so surreal to remember and to be there in that time, because it was surreal is the only word to describe it. I mean, even trying to, just having been in Berlin and trying to explain to the people I was with, well, there was a wall here and there were men with machine guns on the other side of the wall looking at us with binoculars. And we were standing here mooning them. And then a policeman came and said, "Don't do that. Those men are very dangerous. Don't moon them. It's not funny." And we were Americans, so obnoxious. And this is the reality. There was in fact, the wall just kept, and then it turned, and there were machine guns over there. And all of this was flat. And, and the people I'm with are like, "What are you talking about?" Because it doesn't, Berlin doesn't make any sense at all. The wall didn't make any sense at all. It's impossible to describe now.
Yes.
And so to also say like, and I was on the other side of it getting drunk and I had all these East German Deutschmarks and couldn't spend it because there was nothing to buy because they didn't have stores really. That doesn't make, nobody can make any sense.
Just being at the restaurant on top of the television tower, on top of the Fernsehturm, would be, for a citizen of the GDR, would be quite surreal. And you just stumbling in there to all the men wearing their gray suits, all these party functionaries, just in the middle of them doing their dictatorship things, the drunk Americans ordering whatever because they had a bazillion Deutsche Marks with them. That's quite a surreal scene in itself. And then you told the story of you being there again in Berlin at the places. It's something I would definitely recommend everybody to listen to. The other story you're often referring to is your long walk across Europe, which is part of it is the Berlin episode. And for those who don't know, you made some money with your music career already when you decided going to Europe for a long walk.
Yes, I was. When you're in your 20s, you think that, well, you're either going to make it in music, you're going to be a rock star, or at a certain point, it's going to be obvious that you're not going to make it. And most people, when they get to be 29, and they still have a small band, with fans, local fans, but no record deal, no tour bus, no $1 million. Most people at 29 say, well, I guess it didn't work out for me, and I'm going to go get a job. And when I got to 29, this was exactly my situation. I had a band in Seattle. It was a popular band, but we didn't get a contract. We didn't get $1 million. We didn't get asked to be one of the famous bands. And so we broke up, the band broke up, and I didn't have any other skills. There was no job for me to go get. I hadn't graduated from college. I didn't have any mechanical skills. I was not a very good employee. And
all the future links are still thousands of years in the future, so no future link community already there.
That's right. There was no, podcasts didn't exist. And so I had a little bit of money, and I told my roommate I was leaving. I told my boss at the magazine shop where I worked, I said, I'm quitting. And I bought a very cheap ticket to London, and I walked out the door of Heathrow, and I just started walking. And I walked across London, and I walked to the coast, and I got on a ferry to Hoek van Holland. And when I got off the ferry, I started walking. And I walked and walked and walked, and I walked all the way to Istanbul. Nowadays, you could walk from England to somewhere on the Balkan just by being in the Schengen area. But back then, right? I mean, you had to get visas for everything. And I guess it's not quite common to say, I will just walk by. Don't mind me. I have no idea how long I will stay in your country. So just the Immigration Act seems crazy from looking back on it nowadays. Well, at the time, so for instance, I went from, I was headed across Holland and made it to Münster, was the first big German town. Mm-hmm. And I was in Winterswijk in Holland, and I crossed the border there just through a hedgerow. And so I was in Germany the entire time without any kind of a visa. And then it was only when I got, into the East that I had to go across the borders very seriously. It was very serious. And also you had to surrender your passport every night if you stayed in a pension or a small hotel. They would take your passport and hold it until you left. And I had to have all my stamps correct. So I couldn't just cross the border like in the forest, which was frustrating. And there were a couple of times when I had to go, when I was in the country, like I was in Romania and I crossed into Bulgaria and the guy, I don't know if you want to hear this story, but I was standing I'd crossed over the Danube at this little border outpost, a ferry boat. And I got to the Bulgarian customs, and the customs agent said, "Are you here for business or for tourism?" And I clearly wasn't there for business.
I mean, at that point, you've walked across at least half of Europe.
Yeah, or more. And oh no, he said it was either business or transit. He used the word transit. And I said, well, I am transiting the country. That's what I'm doing. I'm going from one side to the next. And he said, transit visa, you have 24 hours to get across Bulgaria. And I said, no, I'm walking. I don't mean transit like I'm on a train. I'm walking across Bulgaria. And he said, not my problem. And he, closed the shutter or whatever. And I was like, what the? And so I went out and I sat on the ferry dock and I was so discouraged. And then the ferry was coming back and I felt like I have to go back to Romania. I'm never going to work this out. And then I noticed there was actually a hole in the fence between the outgoing ferry traffic and the incoming ferry traffic. And so I waited for the ferry to dock. I slipped through the hole in the fence and got up to the front of the people that were coming up to the customs agent. It was a different agent. And I said, I'm here on a business visa. And they gave me some 2-week visa. And as they were flipping through the passport, they just didn't notice the page where I already had a stamp from that day. I really lucked out. That was weird.
Do you still have the passport with all your traveling marks from back then?
I do. It expired a long time ago, but
sure.
I have it, and it's one of those small treasures.
Yeah, I can imagine that. When you've talked in your recent episodes about things you own and things you tried getting rid of, I just have to ask, did your effects pedal collection completed?
Well, no, and for your listeners, my band has started playing shows again after many years being somewhat dormant, and I went down into my gear closet, all my equipment, and I started sorting through all the things, and I realized I had so much equipment. Anyone who has, I'm sure this is true for people with computers, and how many phones do you have, in a drawer somewhere? But I had so many guitars and amplifiers and effects pedals, and as I was sorting them, I realized I had entire collections of effects pedals that I never realized that I had collections by brand, like Boss pedals, DOD pedals, Electro-Harmonix pedals, enough that I could string them together and make whole pedal boards just out of one brand. And then I became, of course, obsessed with that, obsessed with completing the collection, which is irrational. It's not helping me be a better musician. It's not helping the show at all. It's
the opposite of decluttering. So
it's the opposite. It's literally cluttering my life with more. I only need 4 effects pedals. I don't need 80 effects pedals.
And you explained that most effects pedals, they will either make it louder, make it somewhat distort, or make it whoop, whoop, whoop. And that's everything that's effect pedal ever will do. So, I
mean, just recently, someone sent me a collection of of patches, badges from different countries that you would sew on your jacket or you would sew on a bag, saying that you had visited the country. And over the years, of course, I'd collected a lot of these. But I realized, oh, wait, I should have a patch for every country I've visited. And so the first thing I needed to do was make a list. How many countries have I visited? And I made a list, a long list. And then I said, now I must find a patch for each of these countries. And some of them, there aren't a ton of patches. Like, for instance, Syria doesn't have a ton of tourist patches, right? I mean, hard to find on the internet. And then all these little islands and stuff. Where am I going to find a patch for this or that island? And it became a new obsession. And now I have something like 50 patches, and I'm talking to people on eBay all day like, do you have a patch from the Golan Heights by any chance? And they're like, no, that doesn't exist. So it's a new problem I've given myself. So, do you do this? Do you have these little collections?
Two thoughts before I'll forget them. First of all, can't wait for the era of embroidering machines in your life.
Yes.
Second thought, I think it's remarkable that the long winters were in hibernation and now coming back. I think it's quite fitting for the name. That
yeah.
And
I hadn't thought of that.
I think it's obvious. Long winter, no activity, hibernation. So and things I collect, I try to avoid them. My guilty pleasure is buying old postcards from the town I've lived in. So I spent 10 years in Marburg. That's a very old medieval German town. It's like picture book medieval town built on a rock. It's a castle on top and an old town centered around it. And the city hasn't changed that much in the last, let's say, 400 years. So, of course, they added bigger roads for carriages and cars and so on. But the city center, the core, has buildings from 1200 something and some added newer university buildings. So postcards from 100 years ago, they will all feature prominent landmarks I remember from being there, walking there. And they are cheap as hell because nobody cares besides some very old men who collect postcards and stamps, and they are dying, and so their family is selling these postcard collections by the kilo. And so there are so many treasures. I have a problem because when you buy 5 kilos of postcards, that doesn't sound like that many postcards until you have them, and then and then you're going through them and you're sorting, and there are some cities you've been to, some cities you remember, some just cards with interesting text. Because just having these windows into the past of somebody 100 years ago having quite similar problems, they are complaining that nowadays they got a telephone in their house and it's so expensive and it's ringing all the time, like 4 times a day. And couldn't people just send a letter or go on a walk and talk about it like normal people do? And so that are such interesting finds that I have a hard time getting rid of them. But and then you'll fill up boxes upon boxes. And so I've started scanning them, putting them online. So internet archaeologists in 2,000 years can dig through them. But beside that, it's I shouldn't buy more of them. But sometimes you'll see a postcard going on there for like €5 and it's not that big of a deal. It's just one more postcard and it's, oh, look, you know the street, you know the scenery, and I'll buy it. But in that regard, I have a lot of hobbies old men have, and it's not that typical for 25-year-olds collecting old postcards.
Are you building a Markland train set? Do you have the little train?
There in the attic, there's some of the train sets of my dad when he was a child, but back then, people bought these ridiculously expensive model train sets thinking they will hold their value. And one of the many sad stories nowadays, nobody really cares about model trains anymore.
Right.
And they are going on eBay literally for pennies. And I like the idea of having a full Märklin train line of the West German Eisenbahngesellschaft, but I think it would just collect dust, so I try to avoid buying these things.
Well, one of the premises of Omnibus and of the Futurelings is this kind of recognition I had when my father died. It was right before the internet became accessible to your average person, right? The snorks, as you say.
As I say, yeah, sure. I myself personally, I claimed the term snork. It's yes, sure.
That's your coinage.
As I will widely be known in the internet, inventor of the snorks.
But my father has only mentions of him on the internet only as a result of me telling stories about him. Whereas I have 10,000 photographs, hours and hours of my voice. And my father was a public figure. He was a politician. He was a well-known person in his time.
A World War II veteran. You mentioned him several times, that he was flying support airplanes in World War II. So
in World War II, in the Pacific. And he was in the newspaper throughout his life. But he's not on the internet. If you were to search for him, all you would find is me. And I realized that there was, in the future, 200 years from now, people will look back and there will be this moment. And before that moment, it will be a moment where suddenly every historical moment is documented to the minutest level. Photographs, commentary, every person will have their lives documented. And prior to that moment, it will be like a dark age. All we have to remember, everything before 2005, is just written in these dusty old books that no one has anymore, these archives of newspapers. It will seem like a prehistory. How could you know any of these? How will you ever know my father? There are no photographs of him really online. And so this hobby you have of taking these old postcards, if you're really scanning them and putting them online, it seems maybe like a frivolous sort of hobby, but in fact, those would not exist. The stories they tell will be gone forever unless you put them online. And if you do put them online, they will survive for a millennia, unless, of course, the electromagnetic pulse wipes all the hard drives.
The catastrophe we fear.
That's right. The sunspot wipes it all out, and we're back to just rubbing sticks together. But I think that's fascinating.
At least listening to vinyl, so it's
yeah, exactly. But if you think of, all those postcards are of a Germany that doesn't exist anymore. Think of all the transformations that have happened, in the last 100 years. It's insane.
Yes, especially in the last 100 years. So I think there was no time before with so immense change. People who just got out of World War I, always referring to the Great War, because how could there ever be such a huge war in Europe? And not knowing what's ahead of them, complaining about all these new electronics coming into the households. It's the reason why I can't give them away or resell these cards is because it's feeling like holding on to history that's otherwise so slippery. So if they wouldn't send these postcards, nobody would know. So it's Yeah, leaving your own dent in history is something I guess most people in the internets want to achieve. And having these people leaving their marks and dents just by accident is something that's interesting and fascinating.
Yeah.
The German philosopher Walter Benjamin, he always complained about modern buildings because these huge steel and glass and these steel, glass and cement skyscrapers, you won't see that people lived in them because they are built to look for 30, 40, 50 years exactly the same. And then they will get demolished, rebranded, whatsoever, but you won't see marks of people living in them, whilst you have these old German houses which have an organic structure, wood that will age and so on. And I love being in places where you can see how this place aged over the years. If there are still ruins left or something, you can see houses built on old house infrastructure and so on. And I can understand both sides, the modernity, not wanting to have something that ages with you, something that always stays as fresh as newly built. But I personally, and I think that's what's binding the future links together, I personally love seeing that time is changing around us and it's changing us and the places we're living in. And therefore, I love collecting these postcards where you can see how few things change whilst everything else in the life of these people changed.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the wonderful things about literature, right? You go look at the ruins of Athens, and you think, wow, oh, these people are an impossible distance from us, living lives incomprehensible to us. But then you read Plato, and you immediately recognize that that he is talking about modern people with contemporary problems, and his arguments and even his language just feel extremely familiar and accessible. And you think, oh, these old stone buildings, these beautiful temples and all these ruins, they just were they were just the houses of the day, but the people are Plato would be perfectly at home in this conversation if you just filled him in on what a train set is. But he would be a fascinating person to talk to even now, and not hard to understand or empathize with.
I have a sweet spot in my heart for paleoanthropology. So the science of humans and proto and pre-humans. And for example, quite close to my location, they discovered the Neanderthals first. And so here in Germany, we have Svante Pääbo, a scientist who discovered the Neanderthal genome. And there is a huge society here in Germany. They are preventing strangers from entering caves, and they are documenting all the caves they've been to and what they found there for archaeology and for scientific reasons. And looking at these humans that lived here 4,000 years ago, that has something, 40,000 years ago, that has something quite eerie to it. There's an itch I feel that I can't scratch by just thinking about them being so close to us and having so different lives. And there are places where we know for sure that Neanderthals encountered Homo sapiens, and these Homo sapiens back then, they would perfectly, if they had the same nutrition, they would perfectly fit in our modern society because they had quite similar brains. And how few things changed while everything around them could change. It's always very impressive. And being in a museum looking at a skull, or being at a scientific institute looking at the newly made gene analysis and understanding that there's just a so minor difference between us and them, something that really, I don't know, it's sending a shiver down my spine. It's always mind-bending how life around us evolved and how fluid time is and how easily time slips away. Just on that note, Noam Chomsky died today.
He did?
Yes. And
I didn't know. I'm not on Twitter, so I don't know the news.
Of course, being dead doesn't care about Chomsky.
Oh, well, I grew up in an era where Chomsky was very fashionable for some time among students, and then he became unfashionable, and then he was fashionable again. So I've spent a lot of time interacting with Chomsky's ideas in the course of, my many years. And I often found him very frustrating, but it's an end of an era for Chomsky to die.
Yes, he's one of the few persons, even if I don't agree with his stance, I always have respect for them because they are well thought out. And he's one of the persons when when somebody asked a question in an interview, he wouldn't just go on and rumble about it. You would always feel that there is a deeper thought to what he was saying, and I deeply admire that.
Yeah.
Yes, and actually he died today, and time is going on.
He was an old man.
Yes.
Well, I think about what you just said an awful lot, and in particular that almost everything is just a simple matter of scale, and often that scale is just a time scale. Things seem so important or so profound because of the way time marches on in our world. Mm. But if we were just one dimension bigger, or if time was, moved at 1/10 the speed, we would see our own worlds, we would see things so incredibly differently. And the Neanderthals would not be so distant from us, and and our own progress would take on a completely different tone and temperature for us. My family are from the north, and so we have a little bit more Neanderthal genes in us than people from the global south, right? It's one of the characteristics of the Germans and the Celts, or the Norse, that the Neanderthals were closer to us, and in fact much closer, because we actually have some of that genetic connection.
Yes.
And I'm proud of it when I stomp around, I stomp and roar. People run and I go, that's right, Neanderthal coming through, roar.
Back on track. So, yeah, I can totally agree on thinking about the Neanderthal in oneself. So I have a quite remarkable bone beneath my eyebrows, and sometimes my scales flakes. So the goo in your hairs that starts raining off sometimes ends up in my eyebrow because it's so exposed, and my mother is always referring to it as my Neanderthal eyebrow. Yeah. Yes.
You need to practice your Chewbacca sound. Can you make a Chewbacca sound? That's pretty good.
Yeah. Back when I had longer hair, they actually called me Wookie because it's quite a harmless nickname. But referring to the Star Wars, you said that I guess the Omnibus, that your daughter wanted to pray when you served dinner, and because you are Christian, from the pray you've made up ended in just the right way, saying this is the way, as the Jedi do. And yes. I told my friends, not referring to you, but referring to the story about that, because we are all atheists, and so we sit down after cooking and we're just joking, should one say a prayer? And so I said, yeah, for sure, I know somebody who's practicing these gratitude prayer of who made the food, who served it, who cooked it, ending it with this is the way. And so we just started doing that as a joke, and now it kept on being a tradition whenever we sit down and cook. And so they don't know that it's the Roderick way of praising your food, but
good.
This little funny idea of yours made it across the Atlantic into some not knowing households, getting translated into German, but it's still going on.
That's wonderful. I love that. There's a story I told years ago on Roderick on the Line when I was just graduated from high school, there was a friend I had who was going, he was going off to college. Everyone was going to a different place because we grew up in Alaska. And he said, I'm going away. My family is moving, and we're never going to see each other again. And we were together at a shopping mall, and we had stopped at this drinking fountain. And he said, I'm going away, and so for the rest of your life, whenever you are at a drinking fountain and you see this rim of the drain, as you bend over to take a drink, you see the drain, and he pointed at the drain, and it had a design. And he said, whenever you see this, I want you to think of me. And so for years, whenever I, not that I wanted to, I wasn't fondly remembering this guy. I was kind of cursing him. Why did you do this? Every time I take a drink, now I have to think of you. I haven't seen you in 20 years, but I'm still thinking about you because you put this curse on me. And then I told the story on Roderick on the Line, and I started hearing from people. Now every time they take a drink, they think about this guy that they've never met, that and he doesn't know that now there are dozens of people that every time they take a drink in a public drinking fountain, they're like, ugh, this guy Eric, I'm thinking about this curse that he put on John Roderick, and now I have it too. It's just such a strange world.
But it's one of the more wholesome curses one could have. So
it's true.
When after 2 years of craziness, I decided to leave my borderline girlfriend behind, she said the curse, whenever you're trying to get off and it wasn't as good as expected, think about me and the life you're leaving behind, idiot.
Oh, wow. She really got you.
Yeah, and that's haunting. So if, to all people out there, never curse somebody that way.
Oh, spooky. That's a spooky curse.
Especially when trying to work your brain against it. And it's knowing some neuroscience, I am well aware that every time I think about it and try not to think about it, it will ingrain deeper and deeper in my brain. But yes.
That's right. You'll be 85 years old and still there it'll be.
Yeah, probably. So over the years, you established a community, the Future Links, and it's the community of internet archaeologists who will dig out the episodes in hundreds of years, but there are some Future Links right now in the present. So have you ever thought about a name for you and Ken Jennings? Are you like Kings of the Present Links, or is there a fitting name for you?
Well, this was from the very beginning when we started discussing the premise of the show. We realized that there was a paradox, which was, as we made the show, we were only making it to be discovered by future archaeologists, but we were going to be hearing from people in our own time. And how would that be possible? What kind of rip in the space-time would enable us to be getting mail in our own time from people in the distant future? And Ken and I thought about it a lot, and we decided that it was just simply a paradox that we weren't going to address, or we weren't going to address in any coherent way. We were just going to dance around it and leave it to future archaeologists to decide what it all means. And I've so far have found that to be perfectly acceptable. Ken's a very smart guy, and he's very interested in science and as am I, and philosophy, and we both have just decided not to talk about time travel.
Yes, for those who don't know, what is Ken Jennings would be the most fitting answer, because he won Jeopardy 49 times in a row, I think. Or
no, 74.
Oh, 74, you're right. Some ridiculous amount. And he started hosting it, following up on Alex. But he's known for being very smart and knowing a lot of trivia. And in the beginning, when I started listening to the Omnibus, I knew him from his Jeopardy things, and I was always surprised how well you're working together. It's not Mr. McSmartyPants and his funny friend from the internet. It's two very, very well literate, lived, experienced minds coming together, adding up things the other one might or might not know. And One Doesn't Esoterica is the perfect fit for your show. I really enjoy that part because it's rarely that an episode is so important that I have to note it down and listen to it over and over again, but it's always fun to listen to. I think the term One Doesn't Esoterica fits perfectly, and I'm very glad you're spreading the wisdom in the internets.
Well, it's interesting. I think we're living in a time now when a lot of people recognize that a podcast is a wonderful thing. I mean, even 10 years ago, people were saying to me, well, there are already too many podcasts. And, I had a friend that I suggested would be a great podcast host. I said, you should start a podcast. This is in 2012. And he said, there are already too many podcasts. I missed the boat. And I said, I don't think so. I think there's room for another. And he said, no. There are already too many. Well, here we are 12 years later. And although it does seem like everyone has a podcast, I think that podcasts are kind of unexpectedly, they're truly they're a contemporary form of literature or journalism or a combination of all these things. And I think with one of the reasons that Ken and I have success as podcasters is we just enjoy talking to each other. We're very different people. He's religious. He's married. He's not conservative. He's quite liberal, but he is, he lives a very, what would you say, the life of a married man in a middle-class home with two children, and they go to church and they make dinner around the table, like they're for lack of a better term, a normal family. And then I am a bachelor and a musician and a single dad and I'm a real ding-a-ling by comparison. But we have this shared curiosity and shared interest in the world and, desire to, if somebody says something, we both, our first instinct is to research it. We're not liable to take someone's word for a thing, not because we're dubious, but because we're curious. Is that really true? Is that thing you just said, is that true? And then we'll go do our own little investigation. Mm. And so those conversations are, I think we have a natural way with each other, a natural conversation. And it's not because we have a shared culture as much as it is we have a shared curiosity.
Yes, I would describe Ken as a very calm person when he's on the show, while you're, I would say, way more laid back. So both of you, there's a chilled, relaxed atmosphere when interacting with each other. So there's never heavy discussion or something. You both are very interested listeners. And I would say the differences between being calm and being laid back, that how you approach each other's topics. It's really something to enjoy, because I wouldn't describe him from just being a listener as an ordinary family man, because he's a TV host. He's known around.
Oh, sure, of course.
Known around the world. I mean, it's not that common for every moment to be a television host, but sure.
You're right. Yeah. And does Jeopardy broadcast in Germany? Is it a known show?
Jeopardy itself is known. There were some German offsprings, so to say, but the US Jeopardy never made it to German television, but the idea made it. And nowadays, I would say the people I'm surrounded with, which mainly men in their 50s. So my other fellow internet nerds, they all consume mostly American media, so they are aware of references to the show. And yeah, the in England they have their own Jeopardy that's way more known in the Europes, but the concept is widely known, and the West German and especially, but the German culture is heavily influenced by the American culture, and with some delay, everything that's big in the US will eventually make it over to us.
Sure. Yeah. Well, yeah, Ken has become, just in the time that you've been listening to the show, he's gone from being a very well-known sort of celebrity to being someone who has one of the best jobs in all of Hollywood and media. I mean, he is on television every single day. And in being sort of adjacent to celebrities for the last 20 years, I've always been in show business, but as a minor player. But that brings you often in contact with bigger stars. And it's kind of well known among all movie stars and all rock stars that the most famous people of all are the ones who are on television every day. Because if you have a hit movie, maybe, 20 million people see it. Hit movie. If you are a big rock musician, maybe you're playing to 40,000 people a night. The Rolling Stones are, they're playing to a baseball stadium every day. But Ken Jennings goes on television and 100 million people watch him every single day. And, or whatever, it's not that many, but it's like millions and millions and millions of people. And even though it seems like a more humble level of celebrity compared to George Clooney or Robert Plant, in fact, it's actually a much higher level of fame because you're in people's houses every day. They see you and think they know you. And so now he's one of the most famous men in America. And he comes over every week and sits in my basement and records this silly podcast. It really, when you think about it, doesn't make any sense at all. But yeah, life is weird.
Indeed, life is weird. So, I mean, just the fact that me, literally a nobody from Germany, starting to talk into a microphone, reaching out to you, saying, "Oh, I like your stuff, I like your podcast, would you mind talking to me?" And you're saying, "Sure, I will be on your show." And now we've talked for an hour. I mean, our lifetime is limited, and we can see every day how it's vanishing in front of our eyes. And still, you sit down with me, somebody you don't know from the Europes, and we're talking about you, podcast, the internet, snorks. It's thanks for being on here. It's been an honor.
Well, it's a pleasure, and I think you're right. It's as we were saying earlier. I hear from people a lot where they recognize that listening to someone on a podcast is a one-way conversation. They know me really well. Of course, I've never met them. And so it's natural to assume that there's this tremendous gulf. But in fact, any time you sit and talk with someone, you realize, well, there's hardly a gulf at all. Even if we share none of the same beliefs, you can be traveling in Ethiopia and sit and have fantastic conversation over dinner with someone that you have no shared references. And so when I get an opportunity, when someone is bold enough to write me on Instagram and say, "Will you be on my German podcast?" Just the audacity is enough to intrigue me. And I think that probably if Ken wasn't so busy and if he wasn't a millionaire, he would also, have the time, because it's the middle of the night for me right now, and I'm up late every night just strumming the guitar. So this has been very fun for me too.
So if you'll ever make a trip to Germany, let me know. I'll try to be the best tour guide possible. And greetings to your fellow podcasters, especially Merlin, who I think isn't getting the recognition he deserves. And,
he's truly gifted. That's absolutely right. But he's also an agoraphobic, so he doesn't want anybody to know about him.
Okay, so let's wrap it up. Thanks for your time. That was John Roderick, star podcaster, and go listen to the Omnibus, become a fellow futureling. And thanks for your time, John.
Yes, this was a real pleasure, Ali. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.